Well, good morning. Today we're going to do something a little bit differently. We're going to have a history lesson, and I want to talk about a few other things. I'm real concerned that because RX is in such a momentum phase that some of us may accidentally start making disease claims. The FDA has really cracked down recently on companies that do this, and I want to make sure that we don't ever do this. So I'm going to talk about what constitutes a drug claim, what constitutes a disease claim, what constitutes a nutrition claim, and you get a chance to see some of the things that we have to do to stay in compliance with the FDA. Nutrition has been around for millions of years. And when my son went for his defense of his PhD thesis, I talked to his major advisor when we all went out to celebrate afterwards. And he asked me what I was doing. I told him I was lecturing on nutrition, and we started talking about some of the things that I had researched. And he told me that genetically, Lucy, the closest relative to man, who's like 1.3 million years of age, ate the same thing and is genetically the same as modern man. So we have done a number on ourselves in the last 2 generations on what we have eaten. So I would like to go ahead and talk about a little bit about history and show you how we really haven't evolved well. So I want to talk about why nutrition, why do we have to supplement, and why we should choose RX. When you look at nutrition, when you look at health, when you look at well-being, you need to look at the role of nutrition. You have to look at the health data that has come in. And some of this health data has been accumulated over the last 5,000 years of traditional Chinese medicine or traditional Japanese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine out of India. So there is a lot of health data. You have to look at the areas of research that scientists and physicians are now doing. You have to look at the role of nutritional supplements, and then most importantly, you have to look at product information. So nutrients impact all. So nutrients impact all. Physicians look at the entire organism and then work their way inside, where other healthcare professionals look at the inside and work their way out. Now, cells are made up of molecules, and then cells make up tissues, and tissues make up organs. And from the single unicell organism that grows in pond water to the most complex nerve cell in our body, all the mechanisms for digestion, all the mechanisms for metabolism are there. So with nutrition, you start with a cell and work your way outward. With medicine, you start with a drug and work your way inward. So let's look at the difference between nutrition and drugs. Nutrition supports normal physiological processes, where drugs interfere with normal physiologic processes. Nutrition also covers multiple things in the cell, where drugs only usually cover one. So in 1994, the DSHEA Act, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, was passed by Congress. Before I talk about that, you have to understand that in the early 1920s, the FDA was formed by a Supreme Court decision because our government felt that the public was too stupid to make a decision about what they should put in their mouths. So the FDA was the watchdog. Unfortunately, in the last 5 or 10 years, the FDA has become the bed partner of the drug companies, and the people that suffer are the individuals that are trying to stay healthy. So in 1994, Congress passed the DSHEA Act, Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and in it states consumers should be empowered to make choices about preventive health care programs based on data from scientific studies of health benefits related to particular dietary supplements. Now, when I first showed these slides to some of my team members, the comments were, "This is very complicated." And I said that I got my point across, because this law is very complicated. You cannot vary from it, otherwise the FDA will come down on you. And for years, the FDA ignored supplement companies. There are about 1,800 supplement companies, of which all but a handful do not use good manufacturing practices and end up giving us inferior products. So DSHEA recognized the importance and benefits of dietary supplements and empowered consumers to make choices based on scientific data. And then this opened up a huge door for this massive wellness movement. And I believe, as a number of other people do, that in the next 5 or so years, this wellness movement will become a trillion-dollar business. So we have to look at label claims for conventional foods and dietary supplements, and there are 3 types of claims. There are the health claims, there are the nutrient content claims, and then there's something called structure and function claims. And this presentation is being recorded, and I will make these slides available to anyone who wants them. Excuse me, because it is complicated. All right? So let's look at health claims. Health claims describe a relationship between a food substance, in other words, a food component, dietary supplement ingredient, and a reduced risk of disease or health-related condition. When I lecture publicly, not when I teach my students, but when I lecture publicly, I always have to start my lectures, and a number of other physicians do this, by saying the FDA will not allow me to tell you that vitamin C treats and prevents scurvy. But talk to the British Navy. For 278 years, they have used lemons and limes to go ahead and treat and prevent scurvy. That's why they're called limeys. They won't let me tell you that vitamin A cures certain types of blindness and prevents certain types of blindness, and that vitamin D cures rickets. I'm a pediatrician. I've used vitamin D for rickets for years, and now it's coming back in England in a firestorm. The reason why I can't say that is that that would make all of these vitamins drugs, and the FDA controls drugs. So you have to be very careful, even saying that this reduces the risk of a disease. I remember Kellogg's in one of their cereals, Cheerios, a number of years ago said reduces cholesterol. Drugs reduce cholesterol. So the FDA came after them. So a health claim by definition has 2 essential components: a substance and a disease. A statement lacking either one of these components does not meet the regulatory definition of a health claim, and if you do that, the FDA will come after us. For example, statements that address a role of dietary patterns or of general categories of foods, like fruits and vegetables, in maintaining good health are considered to be dietary guidance rather than health claims. And that's why you'll see us talk publicly about omega Q, for instance, supports good energy balance in the cells, supports normal healthy fats in the body, because then it becomes a nutrient claim and not a health claim. Dietary guideline statements used on food labels must be truthful and not misleading, and unfortunately a lot of these are. Statements that address a role of a specific substance in maintaining normal healthy structures or functions of the body are what are called structure or function claims. And unlike these health claims, dietary guidance statements and structure function claims are not subject to pre-market review and authorization by the FDA. So we have a small window where we can talk about the nutrient aspects of what we're dealing with before it becomes a health claim. Now, let's look at nutrient content claims. The Nutrition Labeling and Education Act of 1990 permits the use of label claims that characterize the level of a nutrient in a food. So we can talk about something at free or high or low, and you have to use that in comparison to another food. So less fat, well, less fat than what? Or less calories than what? So if it's a vegetable and it's a canned vegetable which contains a lot of salt, and this one says less salt, that means compared to their other product, there's less of a nutrient, all right? So when you give things like 200 milligrams of sodium, that does not otherwise characterize the nutrient level of a nutrient present, so that is a little bit different than nutrient content claim. The requirements that govern the use of a nutrient content claims help ensure that descriptive terms such as high or low are used consistently. All right, we never had this before 1990, so I could tell you that my snake oil that I sell out of the back of my wagon was low in this. Well, low compared to what? Could have been low compared to the ocean, but now you have to be more specific. Healthy is an implied nutrient content claim that characterizes the food as having healthy levels of total fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, sodium, whatever. Percentage claims for dietary supplements are another category of nutrient content claims. And we talk about RDAs, recommended daily allowance or dietary allowance, and that is for a small group of healthy people. And that's the amount of sodium or the amount of fat or the amount of protein or a vitamin that a healthy person, that is a person who's already healthy, has to take to remain healthy. And this is levels that are established by the Institute of Medicine or the FDA or the USDA. These claims are used to describe the percentage level of a dietary ingredient in a dietary supplement. And sometimes we have no established daily value. Structure and function claims historically have appeared on labels of conventional foods and dietary supplements as well as drugs. And the DSHEA Act established some special regulatory requirements and procedures for using structure function claims and two related types of dietary supplement labeling claims, claims of general well-being and claims related to a nutrient deficiency disease. Now, you know, you're constantly hearing things like calcium builds strong bones. We all know that calcium is important. And structure function claims may describe the role of a nutrient or dietary ingredient intended to affect normal structure or normal function of the body. Now, the FDA, I told you, would not let me tell you that vitamin C cures scurvy. There is an exception to that. If all of a sudden scurvy became prevalent in this country, I could say that. That's not a disease claim. That's a nutrient claim. So, since in my professional career of almost 40 years, I've never seen a single case of scurvy, I can't say it. But maybe, since it has to be in the United States, if England is having an increase in rickets, and I'm sure we are having an increase in rickets in children in this country because of lack of vitamin D and calcium, then perhaps in the next year or two I will be able to lecture publicly and say vitamin D cures rickets. But right now I can't say that because it's not prevalent in a large number of U.S. population. In addition, structure function claims may characterize the means by which a nutrient or dietary ingredient acts to maintain such structure or function. Fiber maintains bowel regularity, or antioxidants maintain cell integrity. General well-being claims describe general well-being from consumption of a nutrient. But again, like I said, These claims are allowed only if they say how widespread the disease is in the United States. So again, looking at rickets or looking at scurvy or looking at night blindness, vitamins C, D, and A, you can't say that. But every physician knows that. 3 types of claims are not pre-approved by the FDA, but the manufacturer must have substantiation that the claim is truthful and not misleading, and must submit a notification with the text of the claim to the FDA no later than 30 days after marketing. Now, you can see this has become very complicated right now, and we have to take our hats off to people like Deanna Latson and Fred Cooper and Mark Wilson, and our compliance officer, Tyler, who makes sure that we don't step over this line. Right now, we are 100% in compliance, and we are doing well, and this is helping our momentum. So now that I really confused you, and I have to say that when I read these, I was confused too. It's a real subtle distinction. It's lawyer speak, but boy, the FDA and the Federal Trade Commission can really come after you if you step over the line. Let's talk about health. Oop. Hang on a sec. So what is health? How do we define it? How do we measure it? You know, obviously health is not a disease, and the FDA controls everything about disease. They've even made obesity a disease, so they can go after the supplement companies that talk about we can cure your obesity. You can't cure obesity. All we can do is change lifestyles. So let's look at what is health, how do we define it, how do we measure it. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This comes from the preamble to the Constitution of the World Health Organization. I think that's pretty specific. Wellness is an interactive process of becoming aware of and practicing healthy choices to create a more successful and balanced lifestyle. Notice there are no drugs involved in this. So, why do we have to take dietary supplements? The simple reason is that only about 11% of Americans eat the recommended servings of fruits and vegetables. A fraternity brother of mine, who is also an MD and a PhD and director of the Center for Human Nutrition, has talked about the fact that most kids, the only vegetable they eat is French fries. And so that's one serving of vegetables a day, or multiple servings of one vegetable a day. And if they dip it into ketchup, then they get their one fruit. But to eat the other fruits and vegetables, you don't see that anymore. Okay, so the U.S. recommended daily intake is 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables, and some people are actually saying that it's between 9 and 18 servings. But the percentage of Americans that are actually doing this is 11%. This is the average percent loss of reported vitamins and minerals from fruits and vegetables are canned. So you can see that from 100% down to a little over 25, 26% for some of the nutrients. This is from a 2000 report on food composition and nutrition tables. We live in a processed world. Everything is processed. 90% is processed, and there's only about 10% of the nutrients in the 90% that we eat. We've had 500 generations from the start of man. 498 of them never, ever experienced what we experienced in our generation and our parents' generation. And for you young ones out in the audience, you go back even, you can go back even further. So we're not getting what we have or what we should have, and consequently, what happens is our bodies don't have these nutrients. We have a nutritional deficiency. Okay. If you look at the amount of like vitamin C in raw, boiled, and canned fruits and vegetables, where raw is in the yellow, canned is in the orange, and boiled is in the green, look what happens. You essentially leach all of the good nutrients, and all that actually remains in the canned fruits and vegetables and the boiled vegetables is sugar. Sugar is not leached as much as some of the other nutrients. So when you make a vegetable, when you steam vegetables or you boil vegetables, most people throw out the broth afterwards. That's where all the nutrients are. What remains is sweet fruits and vegetables, and there is some nutrition, but not nearly as much. In 2002, the American Medical Association came out in an editorial after a scientific review of what Americans were eating that most people do not consume an optimal amount of vitamins by diet alone. It appears prudent to take vitamin supplements, and actually they recommended that physicians suggest vitamins and minerals to all men, women, and children. And this was a major shift in the way physicians looked at nutrition. And you have to understand that historically, nutrition takes up about 20 minutes of a medical student, intern, residents, and fellows postgraduate education. If you're not interested in nutrition, you never do any additional studying. So this is my fraternity brother, David Heber. We now have a substantial body of data showing that if everyone took a few supplements every day, they could significantly lower their risk of a multitude of serious diseases. That was in a press conference for the Council of Responsible Nutrition in 1998. That was pretty significant. This is the scientific rationale for nutrition therapy. Now, I can't show you the progression, but I'm going to tell you what happened. This was done by the CDC. Obesity trends among U.S. adults, their body mass index greater than or equal to 30, or about 30 pounds overweight for a 5'4" person. They looked at 1985 to 2002. In 1985, all of the states were this light blue that I'm pointing to. And over the next, within one generation, over the next almost 10 years, look how many red states we have. I don't think President Bush, when he talked about red states, was talking about states that are getting fat, and they're only now in 2014, I think Colorado still is the only state that is blue, which means that 19% or less of the population is obese. So let's look at the reality of nutrition. When we can expand our awareness of the prevalence of suboptimal nutritional intake, we can enable consumers to see the value in appropriate nutritional supplementation. And it has to be good nutritional supplementation. I spoke a number of years ago in Yellowstone, and of course I started my speech, anybody from the FDA here, anybody from the FTC here, and because they're federal agencies, they need to identify themselves. A man in uniform standing in the back that I didn't see walk in, and I made a comment about most supplements never dissolve in the body. That there's X-ray evidence that they stay in the GI system and they come out the same way they came in pill form. And he interrupts me, and I'm thinking, I'm in trouble. And he says that one of his jobs is to clean the porta potties at Yellowstone. And he says not only do the pills come out the same way they came in, but the names of some of the supplements are still on the pills. So you have to have a supplement that gets absorbed into your body. The FDA, the USDA, the Institute of Medicine recommends 2,000 milligrams of calcium a day for a postmenopausal woman. But you only need about 60 milligrams. And the reason why is that almost every supplement that contains calcium, only about 5% is absorbed. So if you're taking 2,000, 5% of that is 100, and that's pretty close to what the FDA, the IOM, and the USDA recommends. But if you take something that dissolves very quickly and is absorbed 100%, then you don't need nearly as much. I always challenge my students before we talk about nutrition to bring in whatever they take daily. And I create an environment in a number of glasses that constitutes what our stomach is. Our stomachs are. And we drop our supplements in there, and then I continue to lecture. And every 15 minutes we look to see, has it dissolved? And by the end of the hour or 2 hours, the only ones that seem to dissolve are the ones that I take. Everybody else's are just sitting there, or if they do begin to dissolve a little bit, especially the fish oils, they're rancid or have a layer of scum, and it's not something that I want to put in my body. So let's go back to 50,000 years ago. Primitive man ate 99% of his diet as vegetables, fruits, roots, legumes, nuts, bark, saps, and 1% whole grains. And these whole grains were natural whole grains. They weren't Budweiser grains, which the majority of Missourians and Kansans seem to take, and they were certainly not GMO. But modern man now takes, instead of 99%, 59% grains, but these are almost 100% refined grains. There's 18% refined or artificial sugars and sweeteners, and only 23% vegetables, fruits, roots, legumes, and nuts, and of course some of the fruits and vegetables are genetically modified. This was done in a study published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition by Dr. Eden, who is an MD, PhD. He's also an anthropologist. And he talks about how genetically our bodies still think we're back 50,000 years ago. You know, we took very little sodium in our diet, yet we ate about 50,000 milligrams of potassium a day. Nobody had high blood pressure. In fact, there were two leading causes of death 50,000 years ago. One affected 50% of the population. That was childbirth and childbirth complications because there were no doctors or midwives. The other 50% were being eaten by a cheetah because you couldn't outrun your food. We didn't have high blood pressure. We didn't have cancer. We didn't have rickets. We didn't have any of the modern diseases that we see. Partly because we got the nutrition that we needed, and partly because we didn't have places for convenience foods that are high in sodium and low in potassium, or high in saturated fats or trans fats. Trans fats essentially did not exist 50,000 years ago. So over many thousands of years, we know that plants are beneficial for health. They were dietary staples, and some of them were reserved for special uses. 5 years ago, when we began preparing for the 2010 U.S. Census, I was asked to be part of the Kansas City region and be their health consultant. And one of the pleasures that I had was being able to go to our Native American tribes in the 6-state area around Kansas and Missouri. And I had a chance to talk to medicine men. And I would say, you know, I'm really impressed with what you do with plants and roots and saps and things like that. How did you ever figure out what worked and what didn't? And they would invariably tell me that by looking at what the animals ate and what happened to the animals, they would choose what to give to their people. And I said, well, what happens if there was an adverse effect? He says, then we wouldn't give it to our people, but we would prefer to give it to the white man. And so that got to be a pretty good joke at all the powwows that I went to. But there are a number of plants that they didn't eat thousands of years ago, but they reserved them for special uses. And of course, Hippocrates, the father of modern Western medicine, knew thousands of years ago that you could go ahead and let somebody chew on willow branch or willow leaves and reduce a fever. And it turns out that willow trees naturally produce aspirin, and so that's where the first drug came from, a food source. So now in the 21st century, scientists are reinvestigating folk wisdom. We're identifying health-promoting compounds of plants, and trust me, every day, probably 20 or 30 research articles are coming out showing what happens to cells when certain things are ingested. And now we are elucidating the mechanisms of effectiveness and learning some of these complicated pathways. We have thousands and thousands of metabolic pathways in each cell, and it doesn't matter if you're man or monkey or the single amoeba that floats around in a pond. The mechanisms are all there. The nutrient requirements are all there. So you have to now weigh what you eat and what you have to supplement, because there is a deficiency from what we don't get in our bodies and what we have to add to give us no deficiencies whatsoever. Now, I like to talk about vitamin D. I told you earlier that the FDA doesn't allow me to tell you that vitamin D cures rickets. But the scientific evidence now, the research that's coming out, shows that vitamin D, which is not really a vitamin, and that's, I'll explain that in a further lecture some other time. Vitamin D is a body steroid. It's very similar to cholesterol. It's very similar to estrogen and testosterone. But we now know that it affects about 2,000 to 3,000 of our 22,000 genes. It helps with about 39 different cancers. It helps with asthma. It helps with possibly autism. And if you look at vitamin D levels in people across the world, those that live in higher latitudes or lower latitudes below the equator, or those that live in areas where the sun doesn't shine much, like my friends in Seattle or my friends in Scotland, the incidence of autism, the incidence of rickets, the incidence of a lot of vitamin D deficient or insufficient conditions is much, much higher. So again, vitamin D has been around for 50,000 years. Nobody got sick with the diseases that D affects in terms of providing optimal levels for our cells. So we're going to learn more and more in the next couple of years, and with pressure from regulatory agencies like the European Food Safety Administration, which is the FDA equivalent in the European Union, they're a lot more liberal because they look at the scientific evidence. They are not in bed with the drug companies. And if a company comes out and says, if you take our cereal, it'll cure Concus of the Boncus, and they have no evidence to back that up, they shut down that company right away. But if you can show their scientific evidence that this nutritional supplement or this nutritional component that you eat has a health effect, they allow you to say that. As a matter of fact, the EFSU will let you say that RestoreX is a Medical One device because it does remove heavy metals. That evidence is there, but it's just a nutritional supplement in the United States. The FDA has a ruling in front of them, and I hope to God it never gets passed. If a health claim can be made by a food that we eat, you will now have to have a prescription from your doctor. So just think of having to separate your food at the checkout line You got carrots, and there's your script for carrots. You have oranges, there's your script for oranges. You have milk that's fortified with vitamin D. There's your script for vitamin D, because these would be drug claims. So I hope to God it does not pass. So what about the future? We really have a lot to learn. We're learning about the interaction of antioxidants, phytonutrients, or those nutrients that come from plants, biological sugars. These are sugars that help with cell-to-cell communication and allow normal cells to figure out which cells are not normal and eliminate them before they become a problem. Which vitamins and minerals and essential fatty acids we need, and how do they deal with human physiology. For those of you that were on the Healthy Body Call this last Thursday night, I talked about another essential fatty acid called omega-7, and the evidence on that is that it will prevent or reverse conditions that lead to metabolic syndrome. That's the precursor for diabetes. So it's wonderful. And of course, we have ample omega-7 in one of our products. And now, instead of just Western education, we're now looking at learning about Eastern medicine and philosophies, because that's where all the evidence is. So, what do you do about choosing a supplement and choosing a supplement company? Consumers have a lot to learn, and that's why it's going to take us a while to teach it one by one. So, recommend that they look for an ethical company. Look for a company that uses good manufacturing practices, and only about 1 or 2% of the nutritional supplement companies out there do use GMP. It's expensive. It requires a lot of paperwork, but boy, it gives you good products. And look for a company that uses no disease claims. Remember, supplements are not drugs. So, why did I choose RX? Remember, those of you that know me, I didn't want RX. I wanted nothing to do with MLMs. But after you've listened to me for the last 2.5 years, it's obvious why I chose RX. Ethical company, no disease claims, thanks to you, all of us in the field, and we have the best products out there. Products that dissolve in 15 to 30 minutes. Products that are 100% absorbed. Products that help us maintain health and wellness.